We're now ready to show what the short-run market equilibrium looks like if the industry has settled into long-run equilibrium. And we've said what characterizes the long-run equilibrium is that none of the firms that are inside the industry want to exit the industry, and none of the firms that are outside of the industry want to enter the industry. And the only way that can happen is if the price has settled to the long-run zero profit price. So we can begin with the average long-run cost curve for an individual firm, because we know that the zero long-run profit price happens at the lowest point of that long-run average cost curve. So if the industry is in long-run equilibrium, we know that the price has settled to this price, the zero long-run profit or the entry-exit price. When we then go and draw the short-run picture, we'll know where demand and supply intersect. So we can begin with our demand curve. That's just the sum of all the individual demand curves. And when we add the short-run supply curve in the industry, it must intersect at this long-run zero profit price. Otherwise, the industry is not in long-run equilibrium. So that means that on the way to this long-run equilibrium, entry and exit has driven the number of firms to the point where when we add the short-run supply curves for all the individual firms in the industry, they sum to this short-run supply curve in the market. So we have a short-run equilibrium that is within the long-run equilibrium because the price has settled to the price where no firm in the industry wants to exit and no firm outside of the industry wants to enter. Once we've settled there, we know that the firms are going to produce the amount of output that happens at that lowest point of the long-run average cost. And the firms will have had time to adjust labor and capital so they have just the right level of capital to produce that level of output. They'll be on their cost minimizing ray in the isoquant picture. That means that we have a short-run marginal cost curve that holds capital fixed at just the right level of capital to produce this level of output, and that'll intersect at that lowest point of the long-run average cost curve. And the portion of that short-run marginal cost curve that lies above short-run average cost will be the short-run supply curve for this individual firm. So that short-run supply curve is derived from the marginal cost curve that holds capital fixed at the level that's exactly the right level of capital to produce this quantity, because the firms have had time to adjust their level of capital given that they're producing this amount. So it's these short-run supply curves that we're summing up to get the market supply curve in the short run, and the number of firms has settled to the point where they sum so that the market supply curve intersects at the zero long-run profit price. So we now have a picture of an industry that's in short-run equilibrium within a long-run equilibrium. And this will be our starting point for much of what we do from here on out. Now, notice that the firms are producing the quantity that's at the lowest point of the long-run average cost curve. And when we first developed this picture, we just said, suppose the firms produce that quantity. Well, now we know why we said that. Because in the long-run equilibrium, that's exactly how much the firms will produce. So in our starting point for our analysis, we start with that quantity at the lowest point of the long-run average cost as being the quantity that firms produce, with capital and labor having settled to the right levels of capital and labor, such that it's the cost minimizing way of producing that level of the output. Now we can take that picture and we can change something in it. So for example, we could say, suppose that there's a sudden increase in demand. Something's happened, there's a sudden increase in demand, and so the demand curve has shifted to this new demand curve. We can immediately then see what happens to the price in the short run. In the short run, the number of firms is fixed, and the firms in the industry can't change their level of capital, so they'll stay on the same short run supply curve. so that the price is going to just rise to where demand intersects supply. And at that higher price, each firm is going to produce more. So we see that we get an increase in output in the market from the original quantity to this new quantity. And that's because all the firms within the market are producing more. In the short run, there's no entry of firms, there'll be no new firms, so it must be the existing firms that are producing this additional quantity of output. But now the price is above the long run zero profit price. And that means that the firms are making positive profit, which means that firms outside of the industry are now making negative profit because they could be doing better in this industry. So firms outside of the industry are going to want to enter. And as they enter, we're going to add to this short-run supply curve. We're going to add over more firms as entry happens. So we get this entry of firms. And they'll keep entering as long as the price is above the zero profit long-run price. So eventually, when everything is settled, we'll be at a new short-run equilibrium with a short-run supply curve in the market that sums over the new number of firms in the industry will intersect the demand at exactly the price where we started. So in the long run, the price is going to drop right back down. The force that causes that is entry of firms. And as a result, we're going to produce even more than in the short run. But when the price goes back to the original price, each individual firm goes back to producing what it produced originally. So how can it be that individual firms are producing less than they did in the first short-run equilibrium, but the industry is producing even more? Well, it's because we have more firms. So in the end, firms produce the same amount as they did at the very beginning, but we have more firms to produce the increased level of output in the industry. And we've reached a new short-run equilibrium within a long-run equilibrium. On the way to that new short-run equilibrium that's within the long-run equilibrium, we saw an increase in price that eventually was undone by the entry of new firms.